Well, good morning and welcome. I'm glad you've joined me on day 28 of our 42-day adventure of trying to find and ask some of these big questions and try to find some good, honest answers to it all. And just as we start today, you need to know that I have about 4 hours worth of material for this morning, but I don't have 4 hours of time. So that's the good news, right? So literally, and one of the reasons I hope you've been doing the reading and listening to the podcast is just we cover able to cover a lot of the ground, because today's big question is just probably one of the biggest of all of them. And how could a good God let bad things happen, right? If God really does love us, He really does care about us, why? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Why is this happening? And it's a huge question. And it's a question that gets impacted by our upbringing. Some of you grew up with childhood faith, and somewhere somebody told you this is what God's like, and that's been the picture you've had of God. It's that picture that has run up, this childhood faith has run up into adulthood questions, and sometimes there's been some clashes. It's why those of you who are parents, and your pet isn't outside where it's supposed to be, and you haven't seen it for a few days, and your daughter says, "Oh, Daddy, let's pray to Jesus because Jesus will bring them home." You all go, because sometimes you've prayed those prayers and they haven't happened. And it's a huge question. And the reality is this, that we examine our pain and suffering and loss within the context of our life. We don't necessarily evaluate on everybody else's life, but on our life. It's why when somebody comes to you for advice, you have great advice for them. But when you have advice for yourself, it's always not so great, right? Because you can always tell, you can look into somebody's life and see what they need to fix. You can understand all the things that have to take place for them. But for you, it's just a hard thing to get your mind around. And there's this piece, this thing within all of us. And it's this idea to connect the dots, right? This happened, and that happened, we wonder why, and how do they all go together? Is there some meaning? And if you're a religious person, and a lot of you in this room today and watching online are, it's this faith thing. Is God trying to teach me a lesson? Is God mad at me? Sometimes people go. What is the reason for this? There has to be a reason for this. And so we look to connect the dots. And the reality is we have a very cultural belief that's throughout our culture. And that's simply this, that everything happens for a reason, right? I heard somebody use it this week. Everything happens for a reason. I believe everything happens for a reason. Well, of course everything happens for a reason. But it's this idea of a cosmic reason behind it, right? Everything happens, so there's got to be some cosmic thing. Now, maybe your kid knocked the milk over this morning because they're clumsy, or maybe they just knocked it over because it was an accident. Maybe there's no greater scheme behind that. So everything happens for a reason. Your copier machine at work didn't break down so you could meet that hunky IT guy. And you're thinking, hunky in IT, I'm not so sure. But yeah, there are some hunky IT guys. But everything happens for a reason. We try to connect all these dots, and we do it so when stuff happens, we look for the connections, the meaning, and the why. And at times we find ourselves frustrated. Books have been written on this. Books by much smarter people than me, trying to answer this question. If God is good, why do bad things happen? Especially, why do bad things happen to good people? We understand why bad things happen to bad people because they're bad, right? But why does bad stuff happen to good people? If they're good and there's a good God, why wouldn't He reward them? Why wouldn't He say, "Good job, I'm not going to make anything bad happen to you"? Why does the bad stuff happen? And so that's where we're going today. And up front, I have two disclaimers. Number one, when we get done today, nobody's going to walk out of here going, "Oh, thank you so much, Mike. Now it makes my life so much better. Now I'm just so much better now, not having had a job in 6 months. It just spoke to me today. Really helped." It's not going to be that. And part of the reality is that our suffering is a very emotional thing. It's not a logical thing. It's not always that we can reason there, but there is some pieces that as we go through that sometimes just knowing maybe why something is happening doesn't make it better, but it just makes us able to bear up under it. So first disclaimer is, probably won't be emotionally satisfying. Secondly, there is an explanation. But it only makes sense if you're a Christian. And so if you're somebody here today, you're not a person of faith, you're not there yet, or not even sure you're ever going to be there, or you're here because, she's kind of cute and she comes here, that's why you're here, or somebody invited you, or you're visiting, or whatever the case is, I want you to understand that some of us have been there. Some of us have been not Christians, and we understand that some of this stuff doesn't make sense. And I'm going to finish up today with, if you're not a Christian, you're going to go, yeah, I figure that's what they're going to say. They always blame the devil for everything, and I understand that. So just a disclaimer up front, if that's you, I want you to know it's not going to be emotionally satisfying, and it's maybe not going to be a great explanation for you simply because of your worldview. But everybody, all of us have worldviews. It's our way that we make sense out of things, and it's not always greatly thought out worldviews. Again, they've been picked up from different people in our lives sometimes. Sometimes we never really sat down and thought too much about them, but we all have these views of how the world works together, the explanation for things, and all of us have an explanation of why some bad stuff happens, but sometimes we run into those moments that there is no explanation. And it's those moments that we wonder. And we scramble. And we look. Sometimes we look up. Sometimes we look down. We look around. So today, thanks for being here, because you're not going to be emotionally satisfied when you get done, and you may not like the explanation. So with that said, let's pray one more time together today, all right? Here we go. Lord, you have left us a record of your dealing with humanity and our response not only to you but to each other. This thing we call the Bible, and throughout it there are lots of stories. Stories of suffering and stories of stuff that doesn't make sense and even has an explanation, a nice wrap up to it, a moral purpose, a moral reason, and even that doesn't always make me feel satisfying for what somebody had to go through. But every one of us in this room knows that there are times that we have learned some dramatic, unable to learn in any other way lessons from the suffering and the evil and the things that we've gone through in life. And we also know that going through those things at times leaves us more damaged than when we started. And somehow through it all, we just want to know that you're there and that you care about us. And that while you may not do something about it now, that we believe you could do something and maybe we don't understand, but we just want to have a sense that all of the suffering and the evil and the pain and all the stuff that hits our lives at times, there's a reason for it, that there's some kind of answer to the question why. And so today, as we look at an old story, in fact, the oldest one we have recorded in the Bible, and then a story from the life of your son, I pray, hopefully, maybe, just maybe, that you can remind us again that even in the midst of all this, that you really do love us and care for us. And if we can leave here today believing that just a little bit more than when we came in, this will have been a good day. And we're thankful for that in your name. Amen. There's a story in the Old Testament, the story of Job. Now, if you're not a person been around church, you may be thinking, that guy just pronounced that word wrong. That's Job, J-O-B, because my mom used to always tell me, son, you need to get a J-O-B, job, and I know that's what it is. That's probably how you, this is just, everybody in religious circles pronounces it Job, all right? So that's what we're going with. That's a tradition. If you want to call it Job, you can call it Job. But Job, this is a story. In fact, it's said to be the oldest story in the Bible. It's the one that was written the longest time ago. And as it comes to us, it goes for 42 chapters. We're not going through 42 chapters today, all right? But I'm going to run through the story because I want you to grasp, because this is one of those stories that gives us this glimpse. It's the one part of the Bible that pulls back the curtain and kind of says, ta-da, here's what's going on. And we look at it and we go, whew, I'm not sure what to do with that. Because here's the story. There's a guy named Job, really good guy. He's a faithful guy. He's a caring guy. He's just a really good guy. He's got a wife. He's got 10 kids, 7 sons, $3. He's a wealthy guy. He's got all these flocks. He's got flocks of sheep, flocks of cattle. He's got herds of camels. That's how rich he is, right? And life is good. And then the writer tells us that there's this thing that happens in heaven, that some people come to meet, these beings come to meet with God. And the devil's there, and the devil asks God some questions. There's this discussion goes back and forth, and the devil says something about Job, or about, people follow you because you do such good stuff to him. And he says, well, have you checked out Job? He's a really good guy. And the devil says, well, hey, he's only good to you because you do good stuff to him. I mean, he's got all these animals. He's got the wealth. He's got these great kids. He prays for his kids all the time. I mean, it's like really good stuff, but hey, he only does it because you treated him well. So God says, okay, well, cause some trouble in his life, but you can't kill him, all right? So he goes, and he causes trouble. And the story tells us that Job's going along, life as usual, things are happening, he's talking about his businesses, everything's going good, and all of a sudden, a guy comes in with a report and says, Job, I just got here, just ran in, you won't believe the story. Some marauders, some thieves came in, they stole all the flocks of sheep, and they killed all of your workers. And as he's finishing the story, another guy runs in and says, I've come from over here, you're not going to believe this. There was this lightning storm, and it hit this big flock of sheep, and they're all dead. In fact, all the shepherds are dead. And then another guy comes running and it says, these other guys came in, and they came and stole all your camels, and they killed everybody. And then another guy comes in and says, you won't believe it, there was this windstorm, like a tornado or something, and it hit the house where your kids were at, and they're all dead. That's the story, folks. That's it. And Job stops, and in the midst of it says this profound thing that basically says, I didn't enter this world with anything. I'm not going to take anything out. So what was really mine wasn't mine. It was really just given to me. But in the midst of this, I'm not going to curse God. And then it comes back into heaven, and the devil's there again and says, hey, I need to do more to Job. And God's like, well, hey, he kind of stuck up to that pretty well. And, no, I need to do more. And he said, okay, you can do more. This time you can go after him specifically, but you can't kill him. And so, if you know the story, he gets struck with this disease of boils. Big pimples, all right? Painful. In fact, it says so painful, he sits in the ground, and he takes shards of clay pots, and he scrapes the skin and pops the pus and squeezes it all over the place. I want you to get that picture in your mind, all right? I mean, it sounds painful, right? And the smell has to be overwhelming, and he sits there, and his wife is so loving and sweet. See, some of you know the story, right? So loving and sweet. She comes and says, why don't you just curse God and die? Which is a very comforting thing in that moment, has to be, But Job has some friends. He has these friends that come, and they see what's going on. They hear the story. They come. They sit down next to him. They rip their clothes, because that was a thing back then to show, pain and suffering. And they throw dust on their heads, because that was another thing in their culture they did. And they just sit there, and they're just there with their friend. But as in most of those situations where somebody's going through suffering, we can only sit there so long silent, because we always think we have to say something that's going to help fix the situation. And so his friends try that. They offer advice of why this is happening. Has he considered this? Has he considered that? Job, have you done something so bad that God is punishing you? God's trying to get your attention here. And so for chapter after chapter after chapter, it's this running story of his friends. Lovely advice. As your friends love to give you advice when things aren't going well. Goes on, and it gives Job's response, and Job's response is, there's nothing. And he's not that he's claiming he's this perfect guy, never sinned kind of thing, but he's just saying there's nothing There's nothing I can't connect any dots here. And they're all trying to connect dots, and he keeps saying, there aren't any dots to connect. And finally, the story, the whole section of Job, right, wraps up with this discussion between God and Job. Finally, Job is there to get an answer from God. And if you've ever read it, you know that it is one of the most unsatisfying responses. It's like when you were a kid and your parents told you to do something, your dad told you to do something, and you said, why should I do it? And they said, because. That's the response, basically. Which is so sad. It was satisfying when you were a teenager, right? I mean, God basically says, hey, Job, can you build mountains? Can you put planets in orbit? Stop me if you can do any of these things, Job. Can you, and he goes through this long list of stuff. And there's nothing. And I love how Anne Lamott wraps this up. But here's the message we take away. We don't and can't take it all in. That's the first lesson, is that when we think about suffering and evil, we don't take it all in, and we can't take it. It's just beyond our imagination. Even the explanation leaves us wanting more. And Anne Lamott, this great writer, she says, why is rarely a useful question. When Job keeps asking God why he has had such loss and suffering, God says, you wouldn't understand. I always want to know why, and I almost never have a good answer. I'm beginning to feel the first disclaimer, aren't I, for you? And part of it is we can't understand because we don't have the ability to see the end from the beginning and all the details. We just think about our life and what's happening to our life. And we try to come up with explanations and ways to connect the dots, and we're left with Anne there and saying, I always want to know why, but I almost never seem to get a good answer. And there's another reason. Another reason we have a hard time understanding the suffering and the pain, and this is that our hearing isn't always great. Now, some of you wives are thinking to yourself, that's exactly right. Right? Don't poke anybody today, but let's all be honest. All of us at times, our hearing is not the best, right? I'll be honest with you. So sometimes Lori says something to me, and I just say yes. Because I got the basic gist of it, right? Yeah, okay. There's other times when I know she's saying something that I need to know everything she's saying, and I can't hear her, so I just yell back, I can't hear you. Guys, this is a great tip, all right? This is a free card for you. Because if you say, I can't hear you, that means I'm not responsible for anything you're saying right now. Now, it only works if you're far enough away, all right? Just look at it. But let's be honest, there's all times when we don't hear so clearly. I mean, sometimes you're going along. You ever been driving your car, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, something happens. A car comes, and a motorcycle comes, and you didn't hear it. You were sort of off on something else for a second. It's like, oh. I mean, we've all had this experience. In fact, we're going to look at a story from this moment in the life of Jesus over in John chapter 14. And the context is Jesus is wrapping things up. This is the last couple of days of his life here on this planet. And he has said to his guys, hey guys, I'm about ready to check out. I'm going to die. I'm going to come back to life. I'm going to go to heaven. And so I'm going to go someplace that you can't go with me right now. To which his faithful friend Peter says, what do you mean? What are you talking about, Jesus? I'll go wherever you go. I will die for you, Jesus. And Jesus looks at Peter and says, really, Peter? I've already told you, next 24 hours are going to be really bad for you. You think you're so good, but it's not going to happen so good. And then Jesus makes this statement. He says, listen, guys, don't let your hearts be troubled. Because stuff's going to happen. Don't let it be trouble. Trust in God and also trust in me. Because there's more than enough room in my Father's home. And that's this language that we don't understand. Because in that culture, when you got married, you went back to whoever the husband's father's house. They just kept adding on. It kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And some of you are thinking, I'm so glad I don't live back there right now, right? But that was the setting. It was just this idea. Community and family was important. It just kept adding on. And so the picture is there's lots of rooms for everybody. And Jesus says, listen, if this wasn't so, what I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you. I wouldn't tell you that unless this was a true thing. When everything's ready, I'm going to come and I get you so that you can be with me always. Together we'll always be. And that's Jesus' point, is that I got to go away for a little bit of time, but when I come back, the next time we're together forever, so then, I'll be good. And then he says these words, you know the way to where I'm going. Which if Jesus says it, it has to be true, right? To which Thomas says, I got no idea we have no idea where you're going, Jesus. We don't know, Lord. We have no idea where you're going. So how can we know the way? You say, we know the way, but we don't even know where you're going. So if we don't know where you're going, we have no idea how to get there. Even though you say we know the way. To which Jesus says, Thomas, I am the way. I'm the truth and I'm the life, and no one can come to the Father except through me. If you had really known me, you would have known who my Father was. Then he makes this declaration. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. To us, looking back after these 2,000 years, all go duh, right? Jesus is standing there. He's been talking about the Father in here one so many times throughout this whole over 3 years with these guys. How could they miss all this? That's what we think as we look back. How could they miss this? So now Philip chimes in. Lord, show us the Father and we will be satisfied. To which Jesus has to be going, I said, he and I are one. You see, yeah. So finally he says to Philip, listen, Philip, have I been with you all this time, and yet you still don't know who I am? And I wonder if there's just a little moment for Jesus here to think, I should have picked a better group of 12 guys. After all this time, and the blood, the sweat, the tears, all the stuff they've been through, and how clear he has gotten, especially his life, as he knows it's coming to an end here. And yet they still don't see it. He says, you know, and they go, what do you mean we know? We have no clue. And he says, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking me to show him to you? To which we go, of course. You've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father, because he's God. They're the one and the same. And there's this connectedness. And then Jesus wraps up by saying this. Guys, just believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Just believe that this is how it's been. I've told you that. You've seen him work with me. But if you can't do that, at least believe because of the work you have seen me do. At least believe of the miracles. At least believe on the basis of what's happened in your life. Maybe you haven't been able to put that connection in, but you've seen some moments. You've seen some times when I've touched somebody's life, when somebody's life's been changed. You've been there. You've seen that. Just believe on that. If you can't believe on, here I am, and I've been with you over 3 years now. We don't always hear so good, even when it seems crystal clear in front of us. And part of it's because there's this painful truth about suffering and evil, and it's this. Right? We think to God, why don't you stop this? Why don't you wipe all these people out? Why don't you put an end to that? Why don't you fix this? Because if I was God, I would fix it. I would straighten out this mess, right? Would we really straighten out the mess? And how we straighten out, would it really be a good way to straighten out? Because we might say, hey, listen, God, why don't you do away with all the terrorists? Let's just wipe them out, stop them from doing it. That'll put a big threat. All of them just died suddenly. That would put the fear of God, fear of God in them, right? But do we want God to wipe out everybody that has some hatred and bigotry in their life? Do you want your grandfather to die in that group of mix? So I don't know about you, but grandfather sometimes got a little bit of hard stuff to say, right? Or wipe out all the thieves. Somebody breaks into your house and steals something, and you're mad, right? Why doesn't God take care of this? God will just stop them in their tracks. But do we really want God to stop everybody who's a thief? What about this week when you walked out of the grocery store and discovered that they didn't charge you for that item? You thought, bonus. Or you found like they gave you a little extra money and you thought, I'll pay this forward. I'll stop by Starbucks. Or we get around April 15th. If we're honest, the evil we want stopped is the evil we see in her or in him or in them, but not so much the evil that comes back this way. We're willing to tolerate some stuff on our part because we see that differently. Oh, hold it, Mike, there's different degrees here. Of course there's different degrees. But who decides where we stop? Because wherever I decide to stop is going to be different from where you decide to stop. And on suffering, those questions, why God? Why has this happened to me? How can we never ask him the other way? This is how it gets around. How can we never happen? I get a job promotion this. Why don't we ever say, why God did this happen to me? You get a raise and you go, how come they didn't get a raise? We don't say that kind of stuff, do we? We're happy that we got the raise. Now, the people that didn't will commiserate. I'm sorry, just work harder. Work harder, not smarter, all that kind of stuff, they keep pushing it through it. But part of our problem with the painful truth about suffering evil is that we are so inconsistent. And it makes this thing even messier because how do you figure this all out? It's just scrambled up on all this stuff. Which brings me to my last point, and that's this. That something happens through it, that is through the suffering and the pain and even the injustice at times. Something happens through it that won't and can't happen without it. Again, the majority of your greatest life lessons have happened because you've had to suffer through them. You've had to push through them. Rarely do you learn great life lessons from pleasure. You have a big banana split. Rarely do you go, man, learned a lesson there. Normally it's a lesson not to eat that much food after I ate something else, right? My favorite quote on this is from Mark Twain. It's true, isn't it? In fact, multiple different writers in the Bible will come back to this idea. James will talk about this. Peter will talk about this. Paul will write about this. And they're all very consistent. They all say you ought to be happy when the stuff hits the fan. Because that's a moment. That's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for your faith to be tested, to kind of see if what you really believe in is really what you believe in. Sometimes it's a way to shape you and strengthen that faith. Sometimes it builds some characteristics in you. It builds some patience in you. And without those things, we would never develop the things we need for life, let alone for something bigger in life. I mean, don't you wish that we could learn patience sitting in a hammock drinking lemonade with a cool breeze blowing on us and we think, oh man, this is perfect. If I could just be like this all the time, life would be so easy. But that's not how you develop patience. You develop patience in those lines that say 10 items or less at the grocery store and you have two people in front of you packed grocery carts. And the one in front of you keeps sending their kids back to bring more stuff. And then just as you get to the front, the little lady puts the thing there and says, oh, didn't you see the light was out? You develop those things only through going through those things. And now, the explanation for Christians. Paul finishes this letter to this church in Ephesus. And this is the last chapter. And he winds it down. His encouragement to them is simply this. A final word, he says, listen, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. And I think that's an important encouragement to not just skip over. that we need to be strong, not in ourselves, but strong in the Lord, and strong in our belief that he is greater, that in the midst of this struggle and the stuff that happens and the pain and the suffering and understanding what Job talked about, that there's this bigger thing going on, but this is not a battle between equals. This is still a battle between God and somebody who's lesser than him. We need to keep that in mind. And he says, put on all of God's armor. And the reason is so you'll be able to stand firm against all the strategies of the devil. And he's got a whole list of what this armor is, and we can go through and break it all down. It's basically just saying, keep yourself focused on God and who he is and what he's done in your life and what he's doing in your life. That's the armor, if you look through it, this armor of truth, the helmet of truth, and this the sword of, all that stuff. That's the basic picture there. And then he says something interesting. He says, for we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies. And I want you to think about that just in the context of your discussions you've had this week. This week when you thought it was an issue between you and your teenage daughter and it was her fault. This week when you thought it was your spouse's fault or your boyfriend's fault. This week when you thought you knew it was your boss's fault, when something wasn't going on, that was their issue. Paul says, maybe it wasn't just them. Maybe there's something else going on here. Sometimes there's something in the air. That's an old saying we have, right? Something in the water. There's just something going on. We are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Which all sounds really strange and really weird. And I get that because it's invisible. But he's reminded us of something that's so easy to forget in this whole process of living and of life. And that's just this battle that goes on. And this battle that goes on is not over real estate, it's over real people. And maybe the stuff that's been happening in your life is happening because at that moment there's a battle going on. Paul says we need to remind ourselves that it's more than just what we can see. There's this other thing, this unseen thing that's going on, this greater battle that's going on that we just happen to be part of. So therefore he says, put on every piece of God's armor. And the reason is so you will be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. We want so much to connect the dots. To get our answers to the whys, to the how comes, to the what do we do now, to how do I make sense of all this stuff? And when will it all end? And when will it be fixed? So we want to connect the dots. But sometimes stuff happens. Right? And sometimes it happens because of me. Everybody raise your right hand and say, me. Right? Sometimes it happens because of you. Let's just all admit it, right? Sometimes stuff happens because of you. Because you weren't paying attention, or because you were paying attention and you wanted that to happen, and then kind of step back and say, what's going on? Sometimes it's our fault. Sometimes it happens because of them. Point at somebody you don't like and say them. See, I caught you on that one. To write this down. They don't like them, right? But sometimes it is. It happens because of them. It happens to other people. And other people do stuff that messes up our lives. Sometimes it happens because, just because. That's why we call some things accidents. Because they're accidents. Nobody's really to blame and at fault. Sometimes there is, but sometimes it just happened. And sometimes it happens because we live in enemy territory. And some of you this week have felt that battle go on in your life. And for some of you, your battle is an invisible battle. It's a battle with addictions. It's a battle with your mind, with your heart. It's a battle with your emotions. For some of you, it's a battle with somebody else. And sometimes it is them. And as Paul said, sometimes it's something else besides them that just happens to be stirring things up. But sometimes stuff happens. So what if? What if sometimes we know and sometimes we don't? And what if we were okay with that because that's the way we have to be? And what if trusting what you know is more important than understanding what you don't? Because sometimes it is. We all want answers. We all want to figure it out, especially when the stuff really hits and things aren't going so good. And there are lots of explanations. Sometimes even getting the explanation doesn't make us feel great, but at least it gives us some idea of why it's happening and what this looks like now. Maybe today all we need, all of us need, is a picture of what it looks like now and of what it is. So hopefully I accomplished what I told you at the start. This was emotionally unsatisfying. But there is an explanation. If you're a Christian, it's there. But let me wrap it up by this way. This next week, just see the tension. And there is a tension between this understanding and why and all that. There is a tension. See this tension as something to be managed, not fixed. Because there's no way to fix it. It is such a real and deep and hard to understand problem because there's just so much parts of it. Parts we know and parts we can't know. And also, read the book. If you haven't got one of the books yet, you can grab one in the lobby as you leave. Pretty quick chapters, easy stuff. And lastly, listen to the podcast. Pastor Jason and I have been going through this, and so each day, about a 6-8 minute process of us sitting around and talking about the topic. We're just trying to be helpful to help us all move and find some real honest answers to some of these huge questions of life.